Before we begin, this video is sponsored by Filippo Loretti. I know what you're thinking, Ryan, you know nothing about watches and have zero sex appeal. Well, that's why my boy Filippo Loretti jumped in to give me this unique limited edition time teller crafted from premium materials that ooze the quality of luxury brands that my broke ass can afford. But Ryan, Christmas is coming up. What do I get my family and friends? Pfft, screw them. Treat yourself to Filippo Loretti's slick Italian design without having to actually be Italian. Want to stop time, reverse it, or move forward? Well, Filippo has the next best thing. The artificial inflation of your own ego that makes for a great conversation starter to the only person you've had human communication with over the last 8 months. The delivery man. The two brothers behind Filippo Loretti had one noble goal: to create luxury watches at fair prices, whether it be as a gift to yourself or others for style or fashion, or simply to tell the time in the sexiest way possible. So if you're interested, click the link below and use the code RYAN70 to save up to 70% off your first limited edition luxury watch completely risk-free for 90 days. And if you're not satisfied, you can always return it for free and get your money back. And lastly, the first 500 sexy people will also get a free $50 gift card for future purchases. Oh yeah. I might do the entire video in this tone of voice. No, I promise I won't. It has long been said that time is our most precious commodity. We're not on this earth very long, and time again we're told we should cherish every moment, take the ups with the downs, and build meaningful relationships, even if they're only temporary. But it's never as possible as we want it to be, as we get so absorbed into busy lifestyles that sometimes we leave things too late and only start to truly appreciate them after they're gone. Stories about time travel have forever explored concepts of changing the past, seeing into the future, and in general dealing with the impossible and incomprehensible. Yet what's striking about some of them is that it's less to do with the science fiction aspects of time distortion and manipulation, and more about dealing with the reality and uncertainties of human existence. This was the case when H.G. Wells first introduced the world to his groundbreaking debut novella, The Time Machine, the story of an unnamed protagonist simply known as the Time Traveler, venturing to the year 802,701, I know, annoyingly specific, to investigate what lies beyond for mankind's future. While it was famous for being one of the quintessential examples of science fiction, it was actually a much heavier commentary on society and the impending devolvement and destruction caused by our own recklessness that in some respects bordered on nihilistic. Throughout his career, Wells' work gave the world extraordinarily creative, intellectually innovative, and even profoundly terrifying visions of how fallible and futile humanity ultimately was. And it's difficult to ascertain just how powerful and mind-boggling these ideas were for their time, given we now live in an age where not only are these themes incredibly overdone, but there just isn't anything left to surprise us anymore. Wells' science fiction was merely the backdrop for his politics, where countless moments in history have exposed mankind as a bit of a cautionary tale. Conflict, power, greed, corruption, meddling with things we shouldn't, and trying to play God in an effort to control our future. But if there is one thing we know for certain that we cannot do, it's change the past. We have to live with our actions and life's spontaneous unpredictability. Sometimes it's painful, while other times it inspires growth and self-reflection, leading to changes and developments that not only allow us to overcome past mistakes, but in the process better both ourselves and the lives of others. Or at least we hope so. despite the time machine's ubiquitous concept, it's surprising that we've never had a tremendously successful adaptation of the story, speaking from a critical perspective. While there are several comics, radio plays, 2 theatrical films, which will be the main focus of the video, and countless loose adaptations and derivatives, it seemed like people struggled to get a properly entertaining story out of it. The thing was, Wells never intended the time machine to be anything more than a political allegory built around his own socialist views on war, capitalism, and social class conflict. So once you remove the time machine from the equation, there really isn't any other defining feature worth adapting. Hell, when you think about it, Planet of the Apes is technically the best adaptation of the story, and it was already based on a book clearly inspired by the time machine for reasons we'll get onto later. While the 1960 adaptation was praised for its Academy Award-winning time-lapse visual effects, as far as the storytelling was concerned, it was a fairly dull and uninspired adaptation that somehow made the concept of travelling hundreds of thousands of years into the future in mere seconds move at such a snail's pace. Its greatest strength was that it was able to take Wells' anti-war message and appropriately recontextualize it to fit with the political Cold War climate at the time, by playing into the fear of the what if regarding nuclear holocaust that was already commonplace in most 50s, 60s speculative fiction. I appreciate that it doesn't try to preach too much of a patronising high-horse moral lesson, as it remains relatively close to the original time traveller's neutral perspective in the book, but when it comes to the deeper symbolism of Wells' world building, especially regarding the 2 tribes, it seems to either ignore it completely or lightly tread around it, undermining the still relevant social commentary of Wells' story. The 2002 version, on the other hand, tried to put aside the divisive political angle and went for a more personal approach to the subject matter. While it still had a lot of the same issues as the 1960 version in regards to pacing and underdeveloped ideas, its greater emphasis on the time traveller's personality and giving him a more refined motive makes it a far more emotionally resonating story. This version was actually directed by H.G. Wells' great-grandson Simon Wells, with the help of Gore Verbinski when Wells took a brief absence for exhaustion on what was very likely a troubling film to shoot. While the film clearly removed Wells' political commentary to make it accessible to a broad mainstream audience, in fact it sometimes feels like a cheap hybrid of Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes mixed with Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, which both came out the year before it, I think its surprisingly poignant setup allows it to stand apart as an adaptation, with the help of Guy Pearce's modestly touching performance and its stellar uplifting soundtrack. I shit you not, when I was a kid, I cried at the end of this movie, and watching it again as an adult, I'd be lying if I said I didn't tear up again now that I have the life experience to truly empathize with the time traveler's story. However, before we get into that, we need to address the Morlocks situation. You know the drill by this point, brace yourself. So the general plot of The Time Machine sees the protagonist travel to the future to find what he believes to be a utopia reclaimed by nature and free from man-made meddling after society collapsed. However, he later discovers that the peaceful tribe that inhabits this new Eden known as the Eloi aren't the only remnants of humanity, as below the surface a sinister danger lurks in the form of cannibalistic ape-like troglodytes known as Morlocks, who were once humans who fled underground during the apocalypse and adapted to their lack of exposure to sunlight. While their appearance in the book is your pretty standard monster affair, it's their reflective eyes that give them that creepy edge. The 1960 version captures their brooding features considerably well with the addition of their distinct poisonous looking skin, which is reflective of the conditions caused by the nuclear fallout. But when it comes to the 2002 version, they are taken to a whole other level of shit-inducing terror, as it basically removes all their human features in favour of a mutated crime against nature. Their first appearance in the 2002 version is hauntingly spectacular to say the least, as it uses visual storytelling to great effect to demonstrate an aggressive hunting pattern that's quite the opposite of the original story. It's a show don't tell scene where one form of Morlock shoots odorous darts at their victims, and then these big bulky motherfuckers emerge from the ground to target those inflicted and mercilessly drag them under the ground. In many respects, it's actually a notably jarring scene, as nothing up to this point prepares you for such an intense confrontation as we go from standard period piece science fiction to a straight up horror movie that's just as, if not more frightening than the orcs in Lord of the Rings. Granted, after this scene, the Morlock don't really do much for the remainder of the film, as we're introduced to the film's own edition of the Uber Morlock, their intelligent humanoid leader played by Jeremy Irons, because of course it is, who exists for literally no other purpose than to act as an exposition dump and give the film an archetypical central villain. Now let's get into the finer details that both films seem to ignore before we end on a high note. The Eloi and the Morlocks are essentially a social class allegory where the Eloi are the upper class and the Morlocks are the working class. It's established in the book that the Eloi are basically idiots who have no knowledge, structure, laws, or any general sense of order. They're like a civilization reborn without guidance or leadership. They're innocuous, sure, but they're also soulless. They take their lives for granted as they don't have to work for anything, and their role and purpose on this planet is virtually meaningless. The Morlocks, on the other hand, are maintaining machinery underground that keeps the world turning and allows the Eloi to continue living in leisure and ignorance. However, we end up with quite a unique subversion to the class conflict theme. While the Eloi have the superficial appearance of humanity, they've devolved into unintelligence, weakness, and unresourcefulness, while the Morlocks might look threatening, but they actually live by rules, structure, and sophistication. It's when the time traveler discovers that the Morlocks are actually eating the Eloi does he change his hypothesis from rulers and servants to a sort of farmer-livestock dynamic. The Eloi are fed a bountiful plant-based diet, and later on, the Morlock herd their cattle together for the slaughter. But since the Eloi are only accustomed to comfort and luxury, they don't fight back, and more or less accept their fate as the cycle of life continues. Yes, that's right, the poor are literally eating the rich. Although much of the story's themes are rooted in Wells' own observations and upbringing, there's still a relative ambiguity to the way in which it's presented. You could say he draws greatly from biblical teachings and Greek tragedies, especially given the recurring references to a messiah complex through the time traveler's perceived godlike power to influence time and space, the Morlock temples, and the Eloi's unconscious obedience to nature's unquestioned way of life. But I think the timelessness of the story is all consolidated in its conclusion. The time traveler jumps 30 million years into the future, where he witnesses a pre-Lovecraftian nightmare, a dying world inhabited by strange creatures, with all essence of humanity seemingly vanished. He returns to his own time to share his discoveries, but quickly chooses to continue exploring and leave his old life behind because what starts as a scientific goal ultimately becomes an emotional one. The time traveler isn't looking to change the world or play God in any capacity. He simply wants to know what comes next. He's driven by natural human curiosity and, in the process, hopefully find peace and paradise. This is why I prefer the interpretation of the 2002 version, because it captures a profoundly human story about the unknown and how science fiction ponders over the weird and wondrous. In this version, the time traveler's motive is to change the past to bring back his girlfriend, who tragically and suddenly dies regardless of how many times he tries to save her. It's a simple yet powerful plot device to show how powerless and fragile we truly are, and later, after escaping his past, he comes to the realization that obsessing over the what if is more dangerous than it first appears. Feeling guilt and regret towards the past and thinking about how we would do everything differently if we were given a second chance stops us from being able to truly move on. So instead of going back to a time where he will continue to feel oppressed by his pain, the time traveler chooses to destroy his creation, end the Morlock reign, and finally start a fresh new life and find a peaceful place he can call home. It's a beautifully bittersweet conclusion, where the time traveler's loved ones feel sadness that he's gone, but hold onto the hope that he's somewhere happy, whether it be a physical place to live life to the fullest, or perhaps an afterlife where some believe the real paradise begins. I love how the time machine perfectly reflects the preciousness of our lives and reminds us of the importance of embracing this world, opening ourselves up to others, and taking solace in the fact that we travel through this life together. It's the little things that matter, so why waste it on perpetuating conflict and difference when there is so much more we can do with our time?